All right, Jason and Scott, welcome. Really appreciate you being here today. Um,
Thank you very much.
yeah, I didn't get a chance to let you know, but I actually started my career at Grandville Public Schools. I
All
was,
right, go dogs. When was that, Dave?
yeah, so it was, I think 2000, or it was the year that Century Park Learning Center opened. I was at Century Park Learning Center for a few years.
All
So
right.
glad to see you guys here today. Really excited. Our group is always really interested in MTSS and especially that interaction of MTSS and continuous improvement. And so we thought that there was no better team to invite in today to have a little conversation around that. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to the two of you.
Sounds
Thank you.
great. um, so uh, what we're going to walk through is just kind of talking about what our current system looks like here. We are working on better integration with MICIP moving forward. I mean, they're very much overlapping processes, and so we're just working on being more intentional about integrating the two into the same conversations. So the goal for us this spring, or for me as the MTSS coordinator for the district, is to revise our data review so that when we come out of it, we have hit all of the MICIP pieces explicitly as part of that process. And so working on that, kind of revising that. So can everybody see the screen okay? Yep, good. All right. Um, so I jumped ahead. Dr. Merkel is our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum. I'm the District MTSS Coordinator. This is my 6th year in this position, I believe, and maybe 7th, somewhere in there. I was a school psychologist before that for a very long time, and I'm happy to talk with MTSS. I could do it all day long. I love it. So feel free to email questions and stuff if you need to. And I mentioned before everybody came back from the breakout rooms, the slideshows, including the expectations, are way too much information for a good presentation. They're dense slides, but that's intentional. It's intended to be a resource for you to look back to afterward, rather than having to take a lot of notes as you progress. So for expectations, please ask questions as they come up. I'll try to monitor the chat, but if you guys see something, somebody put something in there, please interrupt me and ask that question, because chances are that you're not the only one with that question. If it's situation specific though, please hold that thought and email separately about that, because you can get lost in the weeds pretty quickly by talking about a specific question that applies only to a specific location. And then kind of the standard meeting expectations. And you know what they are, and you know that we know that you know what they are. So paying attention, keeping technology use to a minimum, things like that. So um, for the agenda, just kind of the introduction here that we just went through. I want to talk a little bit about our implementation timeline, what that has looked like from first starting the process to where we are now, looking at our MTSS model and in the context of the practice profile and the MICIP problem solving process, and then any discussions or questions or discussion that you might want to have afterward. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end to ask the question. So who Grandville is, we're a suburban district near Grand Rapids, right around 6,000 students, a little under that, pre-K through 12th grade. We have an early childhood center now, 7 elementaries, and then next year we are opening a 5-6 building. Right now the 5th and 6th graders are in the elementary buildings, but we'll be moving them to their own building next year. 1 middle school, 1 high school. Predominantly white, about 70%, and you can see the breakdown there of the other ethnic and racial categories in Grandville. Interestingly, our first second language, I guess you would say, is Spanish, but Kinyarwandan is now our second most popularly spoken second language, next to Spanish and English. So I guess third. And then about 35 to 40% free and reduced lunch. That varies quite a bit from building to building, but that's the district-wide average there. All right, so implementation timeline. 2015-16 school year is when we really got underway. We formed the district implementation team. The summer just prior to the start of that school year, we took the district capacity assessment for the first time, and we had a whopping 6% capacity, and that was a little generous because I think that we gave ourselves some points just so we didn't answer zero for everything. Looking back now, knowing what we know, we probably were below that 6% to start. 2016-17, we started an elementary cohort for at the academic side of MTSS. A little bit backward, a lot of districts, if you're partnered with MICIP, start with the PBIS model and then move into the academic reading piece. But our district at the time, superintendent wanted to do the academic piece first. And so we sent 3 elementary buildings through the initial training series at Kent ISD. And then the following year, we sent them back through it again because we realized as we got into it that we didn't really know what we didn't know. And so we started the second cohort, but then sent that same initial cohort back through that again the following year. And that had the secondary effect of being, of putting both cohorts on the same timeline, which ended up being helpful down the road. But we got into that first year and just thought, like, man, we don't feel like we really got that going well, and we want to revisit. The year after that, 2018-19, the elementary cohorts both started the PBIS installation process, and so did the middle and high school. That year, the high school actually just shadowed one of the teams to kind of get a sense of what it looked like. And they have done a really slow roll with their MTSS implementation, but it has worked out really well for them. We'll talk more about that. 1920, the middle school and high school continued that, and the elementary buildings just continued to refine both the academic and PBIS sides of that model. Following year, pretty much just a holding pattern. We kept the wheels on, barely, clung onto our MTSS processes by our fingertips that full COVID year. But I joke a little bit about that and only half joke that we barely held on. But we did actually expand our reading intervention work that year quite a bit. So in the spring of 2019, 2020, and being out for the COVID couple of months there, we had started the intervention selection and alignment process with a committee. And it turns out that when there's no clear system in place, an MTSS coordinator doesn't have a lot to do in March and April of 2020. And so I did a lot of time doing selection and alignment of reading intervention and clarifying some of that work with our team. Later in the presentation, there's a link to what that process looks like and to the interventions that we decided upon and how we use those. 21-22, high school finished installation of PBIS model. We expanded our social emotional support access a lot. We are now up to 1 social emotional learning support coach in every one of our buildings, which is really nice. And then with those positions in place, we engaged in a selection and alignment process for social emotional behavioral interventions and really expanded our tier 2 model that year. And then last year, we really formalized our tier 2 model and have kind of an automatic system in place that identifies students who need that support rather than waiting for teacher referral. We expanded and formalized our tier 2 and tier 3 for the academic side of MTSS and started MTSS implementation using the pyramid model in the preschool setting last year, and that work continues this year. This year, continuing to revise our tier 2 model. One of the things that we're working on is developing our tier 3 extension of our tier 2 work, but then also working to really get better at monitoring fidelity, access, and effectiveness of intervention work for all areas, but especially for the social emotional and behavioral side of things. We added math interventionists this year in our Title I buildings and started using Acadience for universal screening. And then in the future, we're looking at that access, fidelity, effectiveness piece, developing a math MTSS model, formalizing tier 3 more fully, and then equity in culturally responsive teaching to address some of our disproportionality that we've been seeing. That's it in a nutshell. Doesn't seem like a lot when you look at it on 3 slides, but that was a lot of work. Questions about that?
From a district level, I think one of the important things for us was looking back to 15, 16. We were fortunate in that a year or two prior, a new superintendent had come in. We were fortunate to get a great person, and Roger's still here, but Roger had been through that training as a curriculum office leader, so he knew it. And those of you who have been through that installation training know that those are some long days. But looking back on it, the commitment that we made and held to develop that system was key when we went into COVID. So Jason did an amazing job of setting up our system and being the champion of that, and making sure that we weren't just going through the DCA and saying, yeah, we do that, yeah, we do that. And we took hard looks and had some hard truths about it, and then committed, but then committing to that system and having some oversight about setting up meetings and making sure people were having meetings and adhering to that system. So then when COVID hit, one of the things I tell people that I'm most proud of our survival of COVID is we maintained our MTSS system. We still screened every student, even though 20% of our students were online. We just figured out a way to do it because by that time we knew that it was important. And so we've leaned on the DCA and the TFIs a lot to help us be part of that system as a district.
Yeah, and I will say that virtual Acadians testing during COVID just about did me in. we have sweep teams who come in and do all of our Acadians testing, and they're all retired teachers or paraprofessionals. And I'm not saying anything that they didn't own to begin with. Like, the technology piece was difficult, and so administering Acadians by Zoom just about did all of us in. But we got it, and ended up enjoying it by the end. So, and
there was some value in it. There was some that we learned some lessons. And Dave, I appreciate your comment. Is that from Dave? Yeah, about the focus. We'll talk about tier 1 because Jason and I are still banging our heads. We still have a tier 1 issue despite our system. But the measured approach was important. And interestingly, Jason mentioned it. We started with reading at the elementary level. And if we had to do it over again, I think I'd flip it. But at that time, our leadership, our building leadership, didn't see a behavior problem. Like in their minds, we don't need that. We don't need that, but we really need reading. And so we kind of locked into where they were willing to go. And I was one of them. I was an elementary principal at the time. And that helped. That was key, even though it made it a little harder down the road.
Yeah, and something maybe I should have prefaced with is we're going to describe our MTSS model. And to a large extent, it operates pretty much like it's laid out. But as you all experience, I'm sure in your own districts, there's a range of how much fidelity of implementation of each component there is across different buildings, and even from year to year. Some buildings really nail it one year and then stumble a little bit the next year. And part of my job, I mean, a big part of my job is just kind of being that nagging prompting, like, hey, make sure you get your meetings in. Have you done this? Let me review your plan. And I jokingly say I'm the water tower, right, on the system, right? I'm the thing that keeps pressure on it to keep all the MTSS pipes flowing. And so it looks really pretty on paper, but the actual use of it is a lot messier than how it looks in a nice slideshow in an hour presentation. So, yes, we are using the DCA in the MyMTSS data system. Yep. Yeah, and David, that sustained change taking time. I jokingly, half jokingly, now that we've had a pandemic, but say that that my job is zombie apocalypse preparation, because if a zombie apocalypse happened and Grandville's leadership was wiped out and turned into zombies, and then 10 years later people come back and say, man, Grandville had a great MTSS model, what were they doing? They could find it, right? Like, it's documented. They could find the folders, they could find all the organizational things needed to restart that system, because that's what helps sustain the system over time and change proofs it. Because we've had principals turnover, we've had building leadership teams, roll over, and you have to have that clear organizational system and documented components in order to be able to keep that over time. Yes, zombie apocalypse ready is aspirational, but like I said, it was funnier to say that before we had a pandemic, and so now it's a little bit less funny. We'll be talking about our model in the context of the practice profile and the problem-solving cycle. I'm assuming everybody's familiar with those as a foundation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those pieces, but it's organized by pulling a section out of the practice profile and describing how we do that here. And so selection and implementation of instruction, interventions, and supports, that ties into the implement and tiered delivery system components of the problem-solving cycle. This is kind of the boring under the hood work, right? A lot of the stuff that we do for this sits on a drive, and we can point to it when we need it, but the average teacher isn't actually pulling the stuff and looking at it. They just have to trust that we've done this kind of work in the background. So our selection and alignment process is linked here. For those that have access to the slideshow, those are hyperlinked. There's also a QR code that you can scan to get to the document and see what that looks like. And so we've done the alignment process for kind of our big ticket things, right? Like our school-wide reading model, our PBIS model. But we also have done that for our curriculum pieces in here. You can see unlocking the reading code is in here as an example. The MICIP units, we adopted Haggerty for phonemic awareness instruction several years ago. And so this is just the top line of what is a much bigger document. And it goes through all the components of a school-wide reading model, all the components of a PBIS model, and just verifies that it at least doesn't conflict with that model and ideally supports it. So we've done that for the major things that we use here in the district. We've also done that for our reading intervention groups and our SEL behavior intervention components. So we created documents that detailed what we wanted to have as part of our reading interventions, as part of our SEL behavior interventions, largely based on the TFI items, but then also for reading, for example, aligned to the GELN, the GELN, what are those called, Scott?
Essential practices.
The GELN essentials are in there. Science of reading items are in there as well for the reading instruction.
So from a curricular aspect, this, for all you curriculum folks, this has been huge for us. And we had a student services director who used to like the phrase random acts of improvement. And we all have that, right? It's universal, where teachers, boy, they found the great new resource and why aren't we using this? And Jason and I like to put everything under an MTSS umbrella. So everything that we can make part of our MTSS process isn't Scott making decisions from the curriculum office. It's not on me or on my shoulders or something that I like. It's we put it through the process. And then if we need a committee input, we'll put it to our DIT. We'll take it right to our DIT team and then integrate conversations around school improvement with our building level teams. But we started by running some of our existing resources through there. But once we started with this selection and alignment, it became our new process. So when somebody from the high school calls me and says, Scott, we're interested in a new resource, I send them the selection and alignment document. Start here, because I'm not going to talk about it from a district level until we're ready. Same thing at the elementary level. And it's great then for us to have aligned interventions. And we're not perfect yet. I got a comment from somebody else here at central office yesterday that was in a building and said, are they supposed to be using this resource? And it's not that it's not good, but we all know the impact of a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And if everybody's just grabbing their own stuff, then we're outside of our system. And this within our MTSS work has really been big for our curricular work, tier 1 through tier 3. And Jason's done an amazing job.
So at the bottom of this slide I linked the brief report, but within the brief report is the full report for each of the areas. That is a much longer document that really gets into the details. Also linked in there are the intervention briefs, which, well, I'll come back to that. We'll come back to that on another part of the presentation. So, all right, I'm trying to keep up on. All right, so screening and assessment system, the assess and evaluate component of the problem-solving cycle. Again, these are examples of information-dense slides that are probably too dense. We document behavior using Swiss. Our teachers document staff-managed behavior. They do that in PowerSchool, and PowerSchool syncs to Swiss every night. Administrators do the majors, the administrator-managed behaviors. And it's a huge indicator of externalizing risk. And we use that in combination with the other data to identify students who need extra support. The same with the SRSS, the social risk, or the, I can't think of what it is. SRSS is the social risk screening scale. That's what that is. And we get an indicator of externalizing and internalizing risk. Really, it's most valuable for us for the internalizing component. The ones that are really high for externalizing issues, you know who they are already, right? I mean, they're on your radar, and they're also in Swiss. But that internalizing piece is where this really, it's a good second point of data for externalizing, but it really flags a lot of kids who would not have been identified for internalizing concerns in the past. The students with the major externalizing behaviors are the ones that are often brought to a child study team or a student support team. And the kid who is really quiet but sad and no friends in the background, who is not one of the top 5 burning behaviors in the room, doesn't get noticed through kind of our traditional model that we did before, or if noticed, doesn't get addressed. And so this really flags those kids for us and brings them to the fore. The second area, we use the early warning indicators, EWI data. And then for reading, we use the PELI, which is the preschool early literacy, essential literacy, blanking on what it is. And then Acadience for kindergarten or actually our young kindergarten through 6th grade. And then after those universal screening assessments, our interventionists use a variety of tools to dig deeper to figure out what exactly is going on. Sometimes there's enough information from the Acadience test itself to be able to figure out, okay, here's what the student's doing, but often they need to dig a little further. The Acadience really is just a triage device. Probably okay, probably need to look closer. You can use a little more than that, but really we want to know more detail to intervene more specifically. So we use the phonics screener for intervention, or the phonemic awareness screener for intervention. We use EQUIP for reading success, the test that he has in there, Dr. Kilpatrick. And we also use it for math. And I didn't update the slide to say math, but math is in here as well, just in our 3 title buildings right now. School climate survey from PBIS applications. We use that. As of last spring, we started using a survey, the student voice survey, through Kent ISD for 5th through 12th grades. Prior to that, we used the school climate survey for 3rd through 12th grades. With our move to a 5-6 building next year, if we don't continue to do something for 3rd and 4th, we won't have any data at all for elementary schools. So we're going to continue using the school climate survey for 3rd and 4th grades, families and school personnel, and the student voice survey for 5th through 12th grades. And then our other state assessments that you guys are familiar with, the kind of universal MSTEP, BSAT, all those things. Right. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat so I can see if there are any questions. Okay.
I got the chat.
Okay. And then we have transition meetings. The high school calls it a care coordination meeting coming up from the middle school. Spring transition meetings between buildings to do that handoff between buildings so that students can be flagged for support right away the following year. And especially from that middle school to high school transition, they do really great work with contacting the parents over the summer to talk about what supports the student might need, and getting stuff in place right away for freshmen coming in from the middle school. And that has resulted in a noticeable drop in risk for ninth graders. We also have teacher-parent referrals. So the teachers use the Swiss log entries as kind of a documentation, and the team reviews those. We'll talk about how that works. But then they also can contact, there's a link that they can fill out a quick referral form to say, hey, worried about this for this student. Parents can do the same. And then students are also able to self-refer by usually through their counselor initially, but they can also go directly to our SEL coaches in the building and talk about what concerns are and request support. And so that, the data is great, but it doesn't catch everything. But just because a teacher, a parent, or a student refers themselves or a student for intervention doesn't mean they automatically get it. They still go through a vetting process that looks at whether or not that student meets our entrance criteria for intervention at that time. Continuous database decision-making, evaluate, monitor, and plan. This is our basic structure for the meetings that we use to do that continuous database decision-making. We have a district data review that we do 3 times a year. Our district team meets for an entire day and really dives into district-wide data. The secondary buildings do their own data review 3 times a year, and so do the elementary buildings. They meet as a team for an entire day, and they generate a plan coming out of that for what they're going to work on to address any areas of concern. At the elementary level, we also have benchmark and progress monitoring meetings, grade level problem solving meetings, 3 times a year for the benchmark meetings, and then a midway point between each of the benchmark meetings for a progress monitoring meeting to check in to see how they're doing on their goals and to make any adjustments to groups that are needed. The adjustments for students are a little more fluid now than they used to be, because with an interventionist in each of our elementary buildings, they're having more real-time conversations with teachers about students moving more fluidly than every 6 weeks if they need to go up or down with support level. We have a monthly tier 1 meeting in each building where a team comes together and looks at the past month's Swiss data and does kind of that global tier 1 problem solving to say, here are the patterns we're seeing on a building wide basis. And then bi-weekly, we have a tier 2, tier 3 intervention team that does database problem solving for students receiving intervention. So they review all the students currently receiving intervention and talk about whether or not they're making progress, meeting their goals. If not, do they need to change? It's also kind of the admissions, that the referral from a parent or something that goes into that team. That team also pulls up Swiss data and SRSS data to see if there are any students that were flagged that are not currently receiving intervention, and then goes through a vetting process to match students to intervention appropriately. At the secondary level, very similar, but they do a bi-weekly tier 1 behavior problem solving meeting. So the high school team actually meets every month. And there's a slide in a couple that will detail that a little bit more. Sorry, they meet every week, every other week. So they have a full team that meets on like the first and third week, and they have another team that meets, a smaller team, more focused team, on the second and fourth week. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Those tier 1 behavior data meetings, I talked about that a little bit already. Our problem solving template is there. I think it's just a variation of my BLISSY 1, if I remember correctly, where I originally got that, but I've modified it for our use a little bit. Looking at those building-wide Swiss behavior data components. And so the response to that is sometimes they'll do reteaching as a whole building, or they'll do reteaching with a grade level about certain things, or they'll make adjustments to the schedule or procedures for kids. An example is they had one school identified that the very tail end of recess coming back into the classroom was was really problematic for behaviors, lots of physical aggression, things like that. And so they said, well, what happens is the bell rings, the kids all come and they line up at the door and wait for the teachers to come and get them. And they stand there for 3 or 4 minutes. Well, when they're all revved up from recess, they're standing in line, they start pushing and shoving. And so it led to a lot of problems. So they just changed and said, all right, we're just going to open the doors and the kids can just go in straight to their classrooms. And it dropped the problem, that specific problem, by a lot. I forget the exact amount, but so that's the kind of thing that they're looking for there. Tier 2 intervention data meetings, I talked through that a little bit already. They also refer to Tier 3. This is the team that will also monitor Tier 3 once we get that system more fully developed. You can see what our templates look like there. We have an agenda template that they walk through and that kind of guides them through the discussion, and then a monitoring spreadsheet that lists all the students, and they can update what the student is doing and whether they need to start fading intervention or what fading stage they're in or things like that. And the team is also intended to monitor access and effectiveness and a fidelity piece as well. We're still building that into it. It took us, we started with just like, let's get the system up and running and get kids in and having conversations, and then we can layer in that second layer of access, effectiveness, and fidelity. And so we're in the process of doing that now.
The templates are, Jason's a template king, right? And it's a simple way, but it helps layer in that system consistency and layers in some accountability for everybody in a really easy way to just have that out in the building.
Benchmark progress monitoring meetings are there. The template is there. These are primarily a Tier 1 meeting. When we first started looking at data, people just wanted to jump right into the students that needed support and get them into groups. What we really tried to do is push that toward, hey, we're not at 80% hitting benchmark at Tier 1. What are you going to do at Tier 1 to support these students? And so a lot of the conversations, especially at the benchmark meetings, are about Tier 1 instructional changes. And then the progress monitoring meetings are a little bit more about individual students. The progress monitoring meetings also happen to align with our SRSS windows. And so at those progress monitoring meetings, we're also doing essentially a benchmark meeting for the SEL behavioral needs of students too. So the monitoring template is in there, progress monitoring meeting. Data reviews, talked about that a bit already, reviewing all the information. This slide's mostly there just as a reference for you to look back at with the template links there if you want to see what those look like. If you ever want to see what a completed one looks like, happy to do a Zoom meeting and kind of walk you through what that document looks like too. And the same with the district data review. When we first started doing these, I have to say it was like pulling teeth. Like I talked the entire day and just told people what the data was, and it was a headache and nobody enjoyed it. But over time, people kept saying, just stick with it and it'll make sense. And it really does. So if you're starting out with MTSS and you're like, hey, this is a headache, it is, quite honestly, and at first. And over time, it really does start to make sense and layer in better for you. So our data review template is there for the district. And then there's a winter summary of what comes out of our data review that I share with the district. And there are also on the very last slide, there are some resources too for an example of a fall, a winter, and a spring update that I share with the district and with the board. What kind of things we're talking about, what our goals are. And then PLCs. Scott, you want to talk about PLCs a little bit?
Yeah, so we started some PLC work prior to COVID, and it was one of the things we did have to put on a back burner, but the templates that you'll see are really PLC templates. And one of the things that we have been really intentional about, I talked about how we try to put everything under our MTSS umbrella. That helps me help Jason feel important. And our PLC work, we just use those templates and we mimic them, but it helps our staff understand that we're not just adding one new thing. Everything that we talk about layering in, we try to braid together, we keep that braided system, and we try to lens through the idea of this isn't just one new thing and help people understand the why behind that. But then a lot of this work then goes out and happens in our PLCs. Jason, do you have a picture of our communication plan in here?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
It's
So
later in the document.
I mentioned earlier the idea that the meetings are important for communication because it helps link these things together. One of the battles that we fought 2 years ago, I think, or 2 or 3 years ago, life gets busy, school gets busy. So we'd have a district level meeting coming up and all of a sudden 4 buildings couldn't be there. And so we set a priority with our leaders that said, if you're going to be the rep, you need to have a backup. If somebody else is the rep, you need to have a backup. So then they can take that back and then share it out within their PLCs. And what comes out of our district level meetings, we put into our PLC agendas so everything is linked together and that all our collaboration is then braided back to what we're talking about. If we're doing it well, nothing exists in isolation and there are always gaps, but that's our gold standard.
What also helped with the attendance for reps and meetings is I started tracking it and sharing the information that said, hey, here's what percentage of meetings, building team meetings you had this past year. And so we started reviewing that information as part of our district data review and sharing that back with principals. And that put a little pressure on buildings as well if they weren't hitting their attendance numbers or their meeting fidelity or things like that. So. Oops. This is our MTSS calendar. I wasn't sure where to put it in the slideshow, so I put it in here. It's between the continuous data use and the screening schedule or team-based leadership, because this has all of our screening dates on it for the different universal screeners and things that we do. It has all of our, yeah, there it is. Yeah. Our printer's got a giant one for his wall. It has all of our data review dates on it. It has, I meet with the SEL coaches once a month. I meet with our MTSS coaches once a month. I meet with our interventionists once a month. It has all those dates on it. So this is kind of the big MTSS calendar for the district that has all the relevant dates on it. If anybody wants the original template for it, I'm happy to share that. I will warn you that the startup learning curve for adjusting it is terrible. Now that I've done it for several years running, it's pretty quick and efficient, but the first year was really rough. Trying to figure
so
that out.
Having this calendar is huge. And we started this a couple of years ago, just scheduling out our assessment windows. But we've layered everything in there. And Jason, this is one of his first projects over the summer to get this done so then we can fit everything else around it. We share it out with our district and building admin at our kickoff retreat, and that's their first task as they're building their school calendars to make sure that everything fits around there. And again, there's a level of accountability because then they're tasked with scheduling their building meetings and letting Jason know so he can get them on the calendar. And then we also have an MTSS Google Calendar so we can go on and see when are these meetings happening in every building. And again, it's communication and accountability that helps link everything together. And it's very pretty.
Yeah, pretty is key for me, like functional and pretty. So Bethany, the template is not on the dashboard, but if you want to email me, I can send that to you. Side note as well, if you guys have anybody in your districts who is in the MTSS role and is not part of the professional community that I facilitate, just shoot me an email and I can add them in. We meet 4 times a year. There are about 80 different MTSS people from around the state that are on the mailing list. And we usually have about 20 or so who join for any given meeting to talk about what's going on with MTSS in their districts and questions and things like that. So it's a great group, really valuable. And there's a resources folder that I can share that has tons of examples from other districts as well. Team-based leadership, planning, implementing, and monitoring. So our district implementation team is that district level oversight and decision-making supports for MTSS, helps with brainstorming solutions to barriers that the buildings are running into, and then creating our district level implementation plan based upon the data that we're seeing and our goals for MTSS development. My job is overseeing that team and leading that team. I guess also, yeah, they're one click too few. Building implementation teams. Each building has a building implementation team that oversees their building level MTSS work. We have an MTSS coach that supports the team. Those have historically been our school psychologists, and they coach one or two teams for different buildings. And then our SEL coaches also participate in that building implementation team now that we have one in each building. And then our grade level teams, those are the teams that meet to talk through their grade level problem solving, their benchmark meetings, instructional planning, PLC work. Our SEL coaches, our reading interventionists, math interventionists, and literacy coach support those teams. And then the intervention team in each building vets students for intervention matching and makes decisions for whether we add a student or change or fade or whatever needs to be done for a student. And like I mentioned, monitoring access, effectiveness, and fidelity as part of the goal for those teams moving forward. Here's a pretty overview of our teams in the district and their meeting frequencies. So our intervention team meetings, you can see meet every twice a month. Most of them are once a month, and then our grade level data reviews, problem solving meetings are a little less frequent there. It was fun when I made this. It was in response to building leaders just kind of not remembering all the teams that should be meeting. And so I printed this out for them, and those little sugar dots you can buy, like little dots on a page that you can lick off. I sent those with it too because it looks like that. So hopefully that landed and made it more memorable for them. So what does that look like? And I left the high school one in here because some of this was poached from a high school presentation we did, but I left this one in because I have found that people are always really, really interested in what secondary is doing. And so our high school team has a really excellent model. And just a little feather in our cap, we are excited that we've been asked to present at the National PBIS Conference next year as an exemplar district around secondary tier 2. So a tier 1 model, they have monthly school improvement team meetings. That's a team of teachers. There's a student from each grade level on that, the counselors, the administrators, and they talk about building level needs around behavior, academics, and engagement. Out of that larger group, there are subcommittees that meet. One that works on tier 1 behavior problem solving. So what are we seeing in our data at tier 1? And what are we going to do about it? One for academic, and then one for their acknowledgement system and special projects. And one of the special projects, for example, that they just did for the second time this fall was an on-time initiative. Tardies were their biggest issue, and so they targeted on-time behavior by handing out specific acknowledgement tickets around being on time to class. And it resulted in a huge drop. They averaged 300 and some tardies per week baseline, and they were down to 118 or something.
It was over a 50%, maybe even close to a 60% drop.
Yeah, I think it was closer to 2/3 drop in tardy rate. And so that was really effective. Now they're working on a special project around engagement and acknowledging and encouraging engagement in classes. Their tier 2 and tier 3 team, their intervention team structure, I mentioned they meet every week. 1 week is their full team. That's the entire admin staff, all the counselors, and the 3 SEL and academic coaches. They discuss truancy, academics, behavior, identifying students who are not getting support but need support. And yes, it's a lot to have all the administrators and all the counselors in the same room at the same time. It takes a lot of effort and commitment. but it prevents that siloing effect that, we have administrators handing out discipline, but the person working with them for social emotional needs doesn't know about it. This keeps everybody on the same page. And then the alternate weeks, there's a smaller team that meets, and that's just one administrator, two counselors, and then still the SEL coach, academic coach, and student advocate. And they review Swiss data and academic failure lists to screen to see if there are any other students that are coming up. And then they formally check in on progress monitoring for students receiving intervention, and check in with intervention providers to make sure that they're getting what they need.
And some of these at the secondary level weren't entirely new, right? We already had a pretty good early warning system meeting happening. The system allowed us to take that to the next level and improve it a little bit. Maybe, like Jason said, unsilo some things. It is a commitment to bring those people together, but sometimes action precedes buy-in. And so getting it up and getting it going, I don't think we could convince them to give it up now because of the improvements and the benefit that they see around it.
Yeah. Apologies, I'm taking a second. Scott, would you be able to copy and paste some of the requests for like adding to the group and things like that? There are a couple of chat messages about MTSS calendar sharing and some email addresses in there, just so I have a record of that. Okay, and tiered delivery system. Obviously, you can't have an MTSS presentation without a triangle, but I like this triangle better because it shows that they're additive, not replacement, with a kind of traditional triangle. Everybody gets tier 1, some get tier 1 and tier 2, and some get tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So we have, this is, when I mentioned that our tier 2 and tier 3 intervention team does matching to intervention, this is our initial triage that they use, and they don't actually pull this out anymore most of the time because they've internalized this, but we have this again for when we have a new SEL coach hire in or a new reading interventionist. So for example, if a student is struggling with behavior and it's attention-seeking behavior, then we might want to consider check and check out, check and connect, mentoring, or behavior contract as our first line of defense. And then the bare bones criteria for entrance are underneath that. And each building has a vetting form that they use. And so they go through and they answer the questions in a Google form, and it kind of guides them to a yes or no about whether this student needs that intervention. And that's really great feedback for a teacher or a parent to say, okay, here's exactly why or why not for matching to an intervention, and being able to share that with them. And then for reading, you can see starting with a foundational skill, like what is the foundational skill that is of concern, which screening test identified that concern, what might you use to dig deeper, what interventions are available for that specific skill, and then how would you progress monitor that skill. And so these are the kind of the short elevator speech version of how our intervention matching and screening occurs for students.
Jason, I really hate to interrupt, but we have an 11 o'clock stop time. I got so into watching your guys' presentation, I didn't realize that we have about 2 minutes. So
okay.
I'm wondering if we could. I know that the resource is linked in there, and we really appreciate that it was set up in such a way that people can get to more information and those sorts of things. So I'm wondering if you have a 1 minute wrap up for us. Sorry, I didn't give much of a short warning.
Yeah, no, that's right. Just clicking through. I'd actually rather spend the last couple minutes on questions. I mean, I feel like the information in there is fairly self-explanatory to read through and understand what we're doing. But did you have any questions that popped up?
I'm mostly seeing a lot of appreciation for the specificity, the specific resources. Seeing a lot of appreciation in the chat. But anyone's welcome to unmute if they did have a specific question.
Scott told me it was too long, by the way. Just acknowledging it.
Thank you. That's kind of you. I would just reiterate that, we are happy to share. We learn as much. We don't have it all figured out. Like I said, we're talking now. We still have a tier 1 problem. But we would not be problem solving without our system And I would just encourage anybody, we learn as much from anybody else as they do from us. So if anybody has any specific questions, please reach out to us. So
Jason and Scott, one of the most impressive things that for me, and it was in the chat, and I think Dave read, is this journey started back in 15, 16. You are almost 10 years in and still refining and growing. And so many times we want things just to be solved right away. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So the patience and the foresight just to keep going is awesome. So that timeline really stood out to me as, wow, you've been at it for a while and you're still not done learning.
thanks,
Yeah,
Mike.
I remember going to the PBIS conference in Chicago when we were first starting out, and there were exemplar districts 10 years into this, and I was like, two responses. One would be like, I can't imagine being there, and two, I'm glad to hear they're still struggling with some of this stuff that we are, right? I mean, it's when I first took this job, I thought, okay, we're not sure if this is going to be a permanent position or what it's going to be. Just give me 3 years. If I can get 3 years in, I'll get it set up, and then it can run itself. It will never run itself. I mean, I have understood that now that there's we've reached an endpoint, right? This is always building and refining and adjusting, and then COVID happens and it throws everything sideways. And so there's no like self-sufficiency to it. It has to be, you have to have some sort of person keeping it moving.
Yeah, and my last comment, and Frank, I could follow up with you, or Ben Borkel, I got a message from. Jason and I have had conversation about how do we directly link this work and our data review work directly with MICIP, because they need to be seamless. Everything, our goal for spring data review is we walk out of that door with our school improvement plan for the next year. If we're doing it right, that's where we should go. There should be no compliance tasks, anything else. So we're going to be working on that.
Well, Jason and Scott, we really appreciate it. And sorry, I didn't give you a little bit more of a warning when we were going at the end. So
all good.
This was really fantastic. Thanks for your sharing and all the resources. Lots of appreciation from the crew. I think this is just what we needed today. So thank you very much to both of you. Last piece of housekeeping. I did put a link to the sign-in sheet. So if you have not signed in, indicated if you want sketches, please do that before you leave. And I guess we're gonna, I missed out on the opportunity to get some feedback from you today. So if you so desire, I think there is a link in there to a feedback piece. So appreciate everybody joining us today. Thanks again to the Grandville folks, and thanks to the other facilitators today.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, gentlemen. Great presentation.
Yeah, don't forget to stop recording, Dave.
What a great idea.